This is the Chicken Yogi Show, hosted by the Chicken Yogi, Kit Kilstow. Kit creates neurodivergent and chronic illness liberation through a devotion to radical free-range wellness. Look for wellness as unique as you are and find your own path with the Chicken Yogi way. Learn more and receive a free gift when you subscribe to their newsletter at chickenyogi.com. And now, today's show. And now, today's show. Well, welcome to the Chicken Yogi Show. I am honored to be here today with Dani, the Punk Rock Autistic. I've been following their page on Facebook for a while, really love what they talk about. And today we're going to discuss not only Dani's work, but also tea. Tea is a special interest, and they will do a little demonstration for us. So let's begin by having you tell our listeners just a little bit about yourself.
My name's Dani. I live in Denver, Colorado. I have been running my social media platform for about 2 years now. I was inspired to kind of get into online advocacy and activism for disability rights and neurodivergency a few years ago. I was diagnosed autistic at 27, but kind of grew up in the special education program. Wild that they missed it, until so much later in life. But worked in direct support and in special education and a bunch of other kind of a little bit of everything in that field for 15 years or so. And from that, kind of thought that there was a lot of work that needs to be done from kind of a firsthand lived experience that is, fortunately growing now from a lot of other people, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And branched out from my social media, and I now do private and individual consulting for neurodiverse people and for families, as well as assist with research programs for universities and provide neurodiversity accommodation trainings in the workplace, and kind of seeing what else I can get into. But that's kind of the gist of my little background and and what I do.
Wow, that sounds not only fascinating, but something that is so needed, especially in terms of lived experience and presenting these trainings and advocacy from lived experience. So that's wonderful. And that's how I connected with your page, was through the advocacy work. And one of the things that you mentioned was your tea ceremonies and the tea work that you do.
Yeah.
And that comes from a little bit of a different place. Would you mind telling us just a little bit about how you got into that?
Sure. It's a really long story, but I'll try to consolidate as much as I can. I have been a practicing Buddhist for about 16 years now. And a long time ago, at one of the temples I was a part of for several years, my former teacher, he is Chinese Malaysian, and in the temple, which is I'm now more affiliated with like Zen Buddhism, but prior was like in Tibetan Buddhism. And within the temple, we had what's a traditional Chinese tea ceremony kind of tea service like area in the temple, where through volunteering in my own work there and studying and practicing, I got really invested in it through my teacher. And when we would have people come into the temple, it was one of the things that we offered, and it was something I was really enthusiastic about sharing with people. And through my navigation towards more of the Japanese Zen practice, there's this whole essence of everything is meditation, and not only with like zazen, like sitting on the cushion, but kind of taking that deliberate sort of methodical kind of practice of everything having intention is kind of what like the tea's like focused on, right? But then it's also like a social thing where, you go to Hong Kong, you see old dudes just like smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey and playing like, gambling games while drinking gung fu. So it can be kind of both perspectives. But yeah, and then I worked at a tea house for many, many years, and it was kind of the same thing. So gradually just became a really big interest of mine. And it's something that I really love to share when friends come over. It's always really cool when like people have no exposure to that, of how drastically different the culture is for tea in the West compared to like in other regions of the world. And with like the particular type of tea that I really enjoy is Chinese and Japanese, Korean and Taiwanese sort of tea styles, which all are they're similar in concept, but very different in different perspectives. Um, I always tell people it's kind of similar to like wine culture or like whiskey culture, where you have a bunch of different cultivars in different regions where things are very drastically different from each other. So it's been kind of a hyper focus of mine for years now. So
And I'm glad you compared it or mentioned it to like wine culture,
yeah,
because yeah, I think one thing that a lot of people don't realize is they think tea is tea.
yeah.
And
Yeah, and
um,
anything that you put in hot water, they consider tea, which like tea is very specific. Like the word tea is like the service in like in Chinese, it's Gong Fu Cha, which is like the way like Gong Fu is just like you would think with martial arts, but like just a practice cultivation or something. But Cha is the original word for tea, and then Japanese it's Ocha, and different languages have similar things. But it's specific to like the plant Camellia sinensis, so it's not just anything you put in hot water. It's very, very specific.
mhm.
But yeah,
Well, one,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, please go ahead.
Um, I don't know where I was going. So by all means, please.
That's okay. I was just going to say, before your water gets cold,
Hmm,
why don't you share a little bit of that with us, and then we can talk a little bit more about tea and the process and
sure.
whatever you'd like to share.
Yeah, I don't have like a big setup right now. My partner and I recently moved here really about a year and a half ago, and I have so much like just stuff built up that and not everything's unpacked. But right now I got a little bit of water brewing. If my camera cuts out, I apologize. So you can't really, let me see if I can move this back a little bit. Here we go. There we go. All right. So um, this is kind of just like my little setup for like when I'm just like serving myself, but um, I'll kind of like address what each thing is. So these are just like the tools that I use various things for, like getting the tea into the pot and cleaning the pot, or certain, here I'll show you, certain types of tea. One that I drink a lot. Sorry, I should have grabbed this before. Is what's called pu'er, which is like one of the oldest sources of tea. It's an old, very very ancient. It's been around for like I think upwards to like 1600 years in China. This is so it comes in like this type of tea comes in a brick, which they call a bing, and you can kind of see it's kind of translates to like tea cake. It's very compressed and tons of layers. And I've actually been holding on to this one for probably about 8 years now. So there's two particular types. There's Sheng and Shou. One is more of a raw sort of like unprocessed, oxidized, very green, not really like green tea. It's a little bit more bitter than green tea. It has a little bit more complexity. It has like notes of like tobacco and whiskey. But traditionally, this would be aged for decades, and through the aging process, it naturally ferments through the enzymes and uh, amino acids and microorganisms that live within the tea, and then that becomes like a darker version of it. And that's usually very, very expensive. And then show is kind of like an artificial form of that. So with the tool that I have, they flash ferment it, so it kind of ferments much quicker. The tool that I have is like a bunch of these picks that like is used for breaking apart. But today I'm not drinking that right now. I'm actually drinking a Taiwanese black tea called Ruby Number 7. And it's a newer cultivar from Taiwan, and it's delicious. It kind of has like this like cherry kind of bourbony kind of flavor. So with
Mm,
all of the tools that I'm using here, this is called a Yixing pot. It's made from a Yixing clay, which is from, I believe, like the Hunan region of China, and it's very porous. And generally when people are using these sorts of pots, I have about 5 or 6 of them. And each single one of them is, you season the pot. So it's like used specifically for one type of tea. So when the oils and the amino acids in the tea starts to, over time, it kind of takes on the flavor of it. So this one I use for black tea, and then, so that's a Yixing. This is just, I always forget the name of it in Cantonese and Mandarin, but this is just what's used to pour the tea into here, and then my little cups and my filter. So traditionally with Gong Fu, what sets it apart from other like tea services from other regions in Asia is that you have smaller vessels with a large amount of tea, and instead of having something like just infuse once for 5 or 6 minutes, it's use a lot of tea, and the infusion process can last for hours. So it's like flash infusions very, very quickly. And the reason why it's designed that way is so that a lot of these teas have a lot of complexity and depth to it. So the more infusions you have, the more that the tea starts to open up and it releases different flavors. So some of these pu'er teas and some of these oolongs and black teas can often have, you'll have 20, 30 infusions with them. But each infusion has a drastically different flavor, and it starts to develop more complexity. It peaks, and then it plateaus, and then it kind of dive bombs, and then the tea's dead. So generally when I serve, when I'm preparing it, I will like kind of prepare the tea in the pot by like heating it up to kind of allow the leaves to open up, unfurl, because they're dry and very compressed. And that's kind of called like washing the tea. And any sort of dirt, grime, anything that might be on it, just organic residue, kind of just, you want to kind of wash it off so you're not drinking that. And since the Yixing absorbs heat and retains heat, it's like generally a good idea to kind of use that wash as a means of like heating it up and allowing that clay to kind of come back to life. And then I just, kind of go over time with just more and more infusions. But yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. But do you have any questions about that?
No, I'm finding this all very fascinating.
Yeah, it's pretty. I wish I could share it with you. This is a really good tea. When I buy my tea, I usually, when I used to live, before I moved back to Colorado, in North Carolina, there were many tea shops, and one of the tea houses I used to work at, and there was a lot more accessible to get it locally. But even then and now as well, when I order my tea, I usually order at certain times of the year when things are more accessible. Like in spring, a lot of green teas they call it first flush, which is like the first harvest is usually the best, usually the most expensive, and usually the highest quality. So every year during the spring, I'll usually make an order for that, and then throughout the year I'll get different things. But and they're all I ordered directly from source, from the farmers themselves, from sourcing companies that work independently and directly in these Asian countries and bring it back for Westerners to enjoy. So it's cool. It doesn't go through like a lot of channels, so the money it's all like a fair trade, so it goes right back to the farmers, and all these are like family owned, and they've been running these spots for hundreds and hundreds of years. So this one's new though. This tea was actually just developed a couple of years ago. I'm a big fan of it.
Wow, and that touches my heart to get the money directly to the farmers. Being of a farmer descendant and farmer myself, some of my education is in ag, and
Yeah.
being able to get things, especially things that come from other parts of the world, because one of the things that I'm very interested in, I just completed a class for my college degree, yoga and meditation. We talked basically about the origins of Buddhism, the origins of yoga, and what the class didn't get into was more the westernization or colonization of that. So to see you go back and to see you take this practice, and I can tell that would be just such a beautiful, calming, meditative practice.
It is. And um, when traditionally, when you go into a zendo, a temple, or whatever, a tea is often used as a for monks and priests and practitioners as a way to kind of stay alert during meditation. And a lot of these teas do have a high level of caffeine in them because Camellia sinensis is a natural plant that has, is a plant that has natural high levels of caffeine, depending on the oxidization, the cultivation of the plant. But what's different about things like oolongs and pu'ers and some Korean teas and some black teas is that uh, whereas like coffee, when you drink a large amount of it, you get jittery, you can kind of get a little bit too much of a buzz. But with tea, like real tea, is that there's a compound called L-theanine in it, and that's an amino acid that actually neutralizes the jitteriness feeling that you get from caffeine. And there's a term that they use in Chinese, and which is cha chi. My pronunciation is terrible, so anybody watching this, I apologize, but which literally translates to tea drunk. So there's a mild, I don't want to say, I wouldn't know if I would say it's psychoactive or psychotropic, but it's through the L-theanine and the amino acids mixing with the caffeine that it's a really pleasant kind of alertness, but very, very calming. Some of these pu'ers, my partner says, it's always, oh, it kind of feels like you took an Ativan a little bit. I'm like, yeah, but without the danger of, using, uh, synthetic, things. But it's a lot of, in China, like monks would, drink large amounts of pu'er, and, during the day to kind of further their studies and their practices. But yeah, it is a very meditative sort of ritual for me, I would say. It's definitely enriched my life. It's enriched my own like dharmic practice, and it's been a great way to connect with friends. Um, Prior to moving to Denver, when I was in Maryland and North Carolina, I would set up a tea kind of. I have a really big tea table that I have, and big portable water heater, and I would set up in the park, and I would have a sign that says, "I will serve you tea if you tell me your story," and that was always a very a wonderful experience because the connections I got to build with people was really, really nice.
Oh, wow. That sounds amazing. That just sounds so beautiful. Yeah.
It was always funny how confused people were. It's like, tea, like, what is all this for? Why do you have all this stuff? I'm like, let me tell you about this. And I go on an autistic like info dump about it. Um, but that's kind of the gist of it. Sorry, my cat.
That's okay.
Yeah, and for me, with my own meditation practice is such a integral part of my life, that the two are, I'll do my more formal sitting meditation and whatnot, and you know, uh, other things kind of with my practice of my lineage and tradition. But this is always something that is like accommodating it before or after in some way. And
I think,
go
oh,
ahead.
I think that's so important that that you've mentioned different types of meditation,
Mhm.
because one thing I hear so common in the autistic community, in the neurodivergent community as a whole under that big umbrella, is meditation as they're taught by somebody doesn't work for them. And um, I know myself, even with just the meditation teacher training I've gone through, it's a very holistic and very neurotypical focused training about sit there, breathe, try not to think of anything. And that's the complete opposite of like working meditations, walking
Yeah.
meditations, things like that. I would love for you to share more about meditation if you feel comfortable doing so.
Of course. So my the lineage that I'm a part of now is called Soto, the Soto school, Soto Shu, which is one of the main pillars of Japanese Zen, and it was started by a monk, God, 1400s, 1300s, named Dogen, and Dogen was a form of Dogen practice. I think it might have been Tendai Buddhism, which is a little bit more esoteric, kind of in line with Vajrayana. I could be wrong about that, but his whole like perspective on it is like the teaching in Zen, which originally came from China, which was called Shan, which was brought to China from India by a man named Bodhidharma. And one of the things that separates Zen and Shan from other schools of Mahayana Buddhism is that there is this idea through the teachings of the Buddha of like emptiness, and there being that enlightenment isn't a goal. It's not something that you achieve. It's your like birthright. It's your natural state of existence, right? And without getting into too much like, you know, philosophical technical things, I'll give the, because I can go on and on about that. But if that's already like the birthright, and we just have kind of been so disillusioned and conditioned through, you know, social conditioning and cultural norms, and this idea of like what the self is, if it is this natural state and not this identity that we associate with, then what is the purpose of meditating if it's already there? And that's what Dogen like was like trying to question. And he found that there's so much extra things added into practice, and so many extra things that we add into our life that distracts us from being in the present. And this form of meditation that exists in Soto Zen is called shikantaza, which literally means like just sitting. And it's a goalless practice. And a lot of meditation practices that exist in the West, like you said, are very culturally appropriated. And there's also this kind of dynamic that exists as somebody who has, you know, degrees in psychology, and it's like my consulting like utilizes that, does not like not denying, you know, this Western method, but that there's something missing, right? Is that there's this idea that like there's this, it's like oil and water between, you know, this Eastern and Western kind of concept, but like in reality, there really isn't a whole lot of difference. It's just the presentation that's different. So you'll have things like in therapy, like, you know, EMDR and like grounding techniques, which are all heavily inspired by Buddhist meditation, but they're missing something, right? And for me, that is like that there's all of this extra stuff, and there's this idea that like you have to stop thinking, or that like you that if like you can meditate wrong. And I really think that that's like kind of misinformation, and kind of an unfortunate sort of like complex that's been kind of ingrained into people. And I think that like when it's taught in that way, it can be really difficult for a lot of neurodivergent people and neurotypical people as well, is that like there's this sense of like, I'm not getting anything out of it. Where in Zen, it's like there's no difference between our waking state, our walking state, and sitting on the cushion. It's just like it's integration, right? And for me, I think that like my idea of meditation is that it's returning to form. It's returning to letting go of this idea that we have to be somebody, that we have to do something, that there's some sort of like alternative, like ulterior like reason for living, rather than just being alive. And that's kind of like a reminder of that. And when so for my meditation practice, and a lot of Buddhist meditation practice in general, like shikantaza is based off of traditional Vipassana, shamatha, like the original source of meditation of the Buddha. And Dogen was trying to return to that, like get rid of all of the extra stuff because it's not needed. Let's just sit and be present. And even like with the meditation practice, it's like the breathing is really just a grabbing and returning back. So when our mind wanders, it's kind of returning back to form, and a constant kind of reorganizing of that without any sort of pressure, without any sort of like deliberate kind of like, I need to do this. It's just a gentle reminder. And with shikantaza in general, it's this idea that there's nothing to gain and there's nothing to lose. It's being completely free, and and kind of following, like in Buddhism, the Four Truths and Eightfold Path of like of unfeathering that attachment of this need to do something. And I think for neurodivergent people, it can be really beneficial, especially for autistic people, because so many of us are ADHD. And when I first entered meditation, it was very difficult for me because I had this idea in my mind that is, this concept that you were talking about, which kind of led this spiral where I'm like, this isn't, nothing's happening, nothing's gaining. And it's sure there's realizations and experiences that you have with meditation or outside of that, but that's not the goal. It's just to sit and to give yourself a moment to not have to spiral out like we constantly do. If that makes sense. Kind of going on a tangent, but I hope that answers your question.
Oh, no, that's beautiful. I'm reminded of the connection between yoga and Buddhism and Taoism, which is the liberation or the freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that when I look at, I see a lot, I am also going for a psychology degree. And one of the things that I see is there's a lot of separation between mind and body. And if we look at yoga, for example,
No, the same.
around around the 1900s, all of a sudden we had modern mindfulness yoga, modern meditation yoga, and we had modern postural yoga, hatha yoga and hot yoga and all that. And that separation, and I see that separation as somebody who has navigated the medical world with chronic illness too, that when we start separating everything, when we stop seeing the whole picture, that's really when we can kind of get ourselves in trouble.
Yeah, I would
Yeah.
agree completely. It's interesting because the word yoga
Mm-hmm.
and the practice of yoga is very different from the Indian, Tibetan, Asian, Buddhist, and Hindu, and Vedanta kind of practices in general, of what that word means and what the practice is in the West compared to like what its original source is, right? Like, so in Sanskrit, like the word yoga, it like would apply to the meditation that I do. It would apply to, esoteric Vajrayana sort of based, like esoteric visualization meditations. It would apply to Kung Fu. It would apply to the stuff that you see, like if you went to your local YMCA. But I feel that like this idea that like, as somebody who's chronically ill and in chronic pain as well, it's something that like, I think this idea of like mind, consciousness, and body being these separate entities is really, I think a lot of cultures around the world through thousands of years have known that like through their own quiet, introspective kind of practices that they've seen that there isn't a difference between these things. It's this idea somehow that we're so firmly like transfixed on this idea that like this this identity, right? This me, Dani, is like this permanent kind of existing like thing, and it's not. It's this nebulous, vapid kind of transitory sort of experience from moment to moment. And in Buddhism, like the idea of like anatta is like no self, that this idea of like an identity doesn't exist. And a lot of people can like misread that as like annihilationism or like, nihilism. And it's not that at all, because it's, in the middle of polar extremes. But that meditation is kind of like a seeing the true nature of ourselves, and like not to get like too like metaphysical, but like from a more like secular perspective, I think that like the meditation practices and developing rituals can kind of lessen this grip that we have on like our own suffering and see it for what it is, see it objectively. And that can be our own trauma, our own mental health, our own physical pain. And for me, who suffers from all of the above, having that practice kind of allows my mind to step back and see the bigger picture of that, like it's a sum of its parts. It's all of these different things occurring, and they're all connected interdependently with each other that creates this experience that I'm having. And when I see that, it's like, oh, it's just pain. It like, for me, it's the pain is so much worse when I'm like not aware of it, when I'm not mindful of it. But when I sit with it, it lessens its kind of vice grip on me. And I'm sure that sounds kind of weird, but like that's just like for me at least, you know.
Well, and I think that's what John Kabat-Zinn was getting at with his mindfulness-based stress reduction, to
Mm-hmm.
try to marry the Buddhist meditation and the just simply being, you know, I'm existing, I am good, it's okay to exist, and to just, to sit here and exist, which is a really radical thing to think about.
Well, not only that,
I
but it's also okay to be not okay. It's okay to
Yeah,
be. It's both. It's like being. The term that that I think really fits with this is like equanimity, right? This idea that like both good and bad exist, and they're all just a matter of perspective. And when we kind of can see that as like it objectively in the middle, like with our own health, with our own state of mind, I think like with what you were explaining, it like really kind of fits with that, especially with like things like CBT and DBT, and more of a what is it called? ABT, I think, is the new one that's kind of awareness based, like behavioral like techniques.
okay.
I think that might be the acronym. Or like humanist perspectives is marrying like a lot of these older concepts and practices that exist for thousands of years, and it's, I think, definitely like destigmatizing them. I think it's been really helpful for a lot of people.
And I think to kind of bring this all together, the practices that we each choose and the practices which speak to our heart, you know, that those can help us be in the moment, be mindful,
Mhm.
as well as help find ways to nourish us, so that way we can, I'm not, my brain's croaking.
It's okay.
But that way we can, that way we can have ways to care for ourselves
Mhm.
beyond, and make our own ways to find that kind of wellness for ourselves.
I agree. I think that like everything that I've mentioned, everything that I've talked about, I think the most important part and the reason behind all of it is compassion. And I think that living in our capitalist dystopia, I think that's something that we isn't nourished. It's seen as weakness. It's seen as something that is like, new agey or like woo woo or a waste of time, because we live in such a hyper individualistic culture that it's become so individualized that like not only we've forgotten about the greater connectivity between all of us, but we've also kind of forgotten ourselves in the process, right? And I think that like all of these things can cultivate, and the purpose of them is is compassion and loving kindness, not only for others but also for ourselves. And we can't do that when we're so distracted and we're so absorbed in the passing of life, when life should be enjoyed, but like we need to remember how to do that. And I think doing that is through finding kindness for ourselves.
And that's just the most beautiful place to end our conversation today. So if you could tell people, how to find out more about you, your work, any links you want to share, I'll of course put them in the show notes as well.
Sure. So you can find me on Facebook at the Punk Rock Autistic. I'm on other forms of social media, but I don't really use them as actively. Facebook is kind of the most, like, I guess, the one of the furthest reach and the one I'm most active on. And then you can also find me on my website, which is thepunkrockautistic.com. And there I have a ever-growing kind of resource like page that has tons of resources for mental health, for intersectional activism and advocacy. There's stuff for LGBTQ resources. It's and neurodiversity and autism and disability rights. It's very massive. It's from a lot of stuff that I find can be really helpful for a lot of people is in there. But then you can also kind of find like where I write my articles, which I've been publishing on my website. And you can also find resources if you wanted to kind of look into my business of consulting and mentorship is also on that site. So those are probably the two main kind of places that you can find me.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, again, I will share those in the show notes for, anybody who wants to find that information. Thank you so much for taking the time to share a little bit of yourself with us today and to talk to us about, Buddhism and meditation and yoga and tea. And I will try not to feel very pedestrian as I open my Amazon tin of jasmine green tea. And
I'm not going to gatekeep you by any means. There's I like, while I probably wouldn't go out of my way to drink that, but like, if that's what's available and you enjoy it, by all means,
Well, thank you. So I will share this information, and thank you so much again for being here.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Chicken Yogi Show, hosted by the Chicken Yogi, Kit Kilstow. Kit's passion is creating neurodivergent and chronic illness liberation through a devotion to radical free-range wellness. We're not one-size-fits-all people, so why should your wellness be designed for everyone? Learn more at chickenyogi.com and subscribe to the newsletter while you're there for a free gift. Please follow the podcast at podcast.chickenyogi.com. Subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Music is Running with the Horses by Purple Planet Music. Their website is purple-planet.com. This show is copyright 2023. All rights reserved by Kit Kilstow and Chicken Yogi. Thank you for listening.